All right, this is 3 Points with Chris Mannix, part of the Volume Sports Podcast Network. Thanks to everyone listening live right now on AMP. Remember, AMP is where you can get all our audio first, from this show to my boxing show, everything we do over at the Volume. This, of course, an NBA show, and we are recording this 3 hours into NBA free agency, where we have already seen more than $1 billion committed to by NBA teams. Just an astronomical number, an astronomical amount of money being committed by NBA teams. To talk about some of the big moments of free agency, early free agency, I want to bring in Mark Medina, longtime NBA writer, writing for Sportsnot, the Sporting Tribune now, all over the place, Fox Sports Radio as well. Mark, let's start with Kyrie Irving, who had an interesting week. He had some media members out there reporting that he was going to take a whole host of meetings. He was going to meet with the Phoenix Suns. He was going to meet with the Miami Heat. He was going to meet with the Los Angeles Clippers. And then 45 minutes into free agency, Kyrie Irving agreed to a 3-year, $126 million deal. So there were no meetings. There never were meetings. I mean, maybe some stuff was scheduled, Zoom calls, phone calls, FaceTimes, whatever. But Kyrie Irving was never going to be seriously meeting with other NBA teams, because the teams that were on his list outside of Houston didn't have the cap flexibility to go and sign him outright. They would need Dallas to play ball, and Dallas was never going to play ball when it came to a trade of Kyrie Irving. Turns out Kyrie didn't need to do anything or go anywhere or create any more leverage than he already had. He gets a contract with Dallas that will pay him roughly $40 million per year over the next 3 seasons. So, Mark, give me your reaction to Kyrie Irving's deal and what it means for him and what it means for the Mavericks.
Yeah, Chris, it's wild. And I think that Ryan McDonough had said it better recently on NBA TV, this evening, where he essentially said the Mavericks were betting against themselves because, as you mentioned, there weren't any serious suitors. I don't have any doubt that Kyrie Irving wanted to meet with those teams in questions. And in fairness to those teams, I think that they certainly would have entertained a meeting with Kyrie, but would have been under the guise of, hey, are you willing to accept a veteran's minimum deal or maybe a mid-level exception? And Kyrie Irving would have said no. And I think even specifically when you look at teams like the Lakers and Clippers, they wouldn't have even entertained sign and trade possibilities, because the reality is they feel like they're better off with what they have. But I think in fairness to the Mavericks, not to necessarily defend the Kyrie Irving signing, but I didn't see any pathway of any other better alternatives. With sign and trades, they don't have a lot of other assets when it comes to using their mid-level exception. I think those other players that we've seen already across the board, whether it's a Gabe Vincent or anyone else, a Bruce Brown, they would have seen other teams as much more attractive. But I think where Dallas deserves the blame is rewinding it back to last season's trade deadline. Because of the moves that they made to get Kyrie in the first place, that put them in this conundrum of having to choose between essentially 2 bad options.
Look, Kyrie's a great player, still is a great player. So I have no problem with him getting paid on a short-term deal with Dallas. My initial reaction was, he got more than I expected. I think Dallas was bidding against themselves. And maybe in that sense, Kyrie's leverage play worked, because frankly, everything that has emanated from Kyrie's camp over the last couple of months has been a leverage play. There was the reporting out there that Kyrie had contacted LeBron James, breathless reporting that Kyrie had contacted LeBron James. And, LeBron, in addition to not being a free agent, has not expressed any interest in being anywhere but Los Angeles. But that, was Kyrie's not so subtle way of saying to Dallas, I can be a guy that helps you get free agents. And we know that's historically been a problem in Dallas. The meetings, same thing, getting the Mavericks number up. That's what Kyrie's been about for the better part of the last 6 months. He is not a member of the Brooklyn Nets because it was painfully obvious to Kyrie and everybody around him that the Nets were not going to give him the type of deal in the offseason that he was hoping to get. They probably weren't going to go 3 years, buck 26, because the Nets have experienced a lot with Kyrie. They experienced a lot of bad there, over the last few years. So this whole thing was to get the most out of the Dallas Mavericks, and he did. He accomplished that. Well done by Kyrie and by his agent. Now, for Dallas, does this, you expected them to bring him back on some kind of deal. The good news for Dallas is they did preserve that $12 million exception, so they can still go out over these next couple of days, and by the time people listen to this, maybe they will already have signed somebody, but they can go out and bring in another player to complement Kyrie and Luka. But as it stands, Mark, Luka's a great player. Kyrie's a great player. Is this a top 4 team in the Western Conference? I mean, where do you rank them right now?
Yeah, I don't see that. I mean, if I had to rank right now under the guise that things are fluid, I would put obviously the Phoenix Suns up there. I'd put I'd put the Denver Nuggets number 1 because they won the championship, but I put Phoenix there. I put the Warriors there, maybe the Lakers, but that's all under the guise of if they stay healthy. And even if they don't, I just don't see that pathway for the Mavericks to be that sort of competitive team. And the ironic part about this, Chris, at least from my point of view, is I don't necessarily have a problem with them retaining Kyrie, unlike his time with the Brooklyn Nets, the Boston Celtics, the Cleveland Cavaliers. In the short window that he was with the Mavericks, the word that was, passed along to me, and I'm sure to you, was that he wasn't a problem in the locker room. He was seen as a positive presence. But while there is always going to be that category under some sort of bingo card that explains some erratic behavior, there are always going to be questions about his durability, number 1. And number 2, the fundamental problem is the lack of depth that the Mavericks have because of what they gave up in that Kyrie Irving trade. Now, to what you said, they have that mid-level exception. They have 7 other free agents that they can let go to fill out the rest of the roster. But again, even if they have that mid-level exception at their disposal, they don't have the kind of attractiveness that other teams have that also have the mid-level. And so we really don't know what that supporting cast is going to look like. But all I know from dating back to last season, even if Kyrie Irving and Luka Doncic are healthy and presumably have even better chemistry with more on-court reps, I don't think that's a sustainable strategy at all, because at the end of the day, they can't have Luka just carrying the team, and they need to have a defensive identity. And if they don't have those two things addressed, not only will they not be at the top of the West, but they very much might repeat last season's nightmare, not even making the playoffs.
Yeah, you said it right there. Defensive identity. They don't have one. Kyrie and Luka, both below average defenders. Tim Hardaway Jr. is an average defender. And there's no rim protection there. I've heard the comparison to the Utah Jazz without Rudy Gobert, and that's kind of apt. It's close to that. They need to find a way to get better defensively, and I'm not sure how they do that with what they have, both in terms of cap space and cap room and assets to go out there and make a deal. So they did what they had to do in retaining Kyrie Irving. And look, 3 years, it's not 4 and it's not 5. So, they're not tied to Kyrie for, super long at this point, but they still have a lot of work to do before they can get into the ranks of the contenders in the Western Conference. All right. The second player I want to talk about is Fred VanVleet, who a couple of hours into free agency signed a whopper of a deal with the Houston Rockets. 3 years, $130 million for Fred VanVleet. Fred VanVleet, excellent player in Toronto, averaged close to 20 points per game last season, 7 assists, very good defender, good locker room guy. And the Rockets went out there and paid a premium. And Mark, they probably had to, because you saw what Toronto did before the VanVleet sign. They went out and signed Jakob Poeltl to a 4-year, $80 million contract. And that was a strong signal that they were trying to bring the band back and they wanted to make a run with that group. The Rockets were going to have to come in big, and they did. They had $60+ million in cap space. They used $40 million of it on Fred VanVleet in the first year of that deal. What did you make of that big contract? And was this the right move for the Rockets?
Yeah, I think it was the right moves for the Rockets, partly because, the alternatives aren't better. I mean, it's good that they didn't go after James Harden. That's a whole other situation. But as it comes to Fred VanVleet, he's a really great point guard, great locker room guy. And I think that when you're looking at the Houston Rockets, this past season, there were just a collection of young players that maybe weren't necessarily like bad guys, but they didn't play the right way. It seemed when he talked to people around the league, it felt like that young core were all about getting their numbers as opposed to anything else. But when you add in Ime Udoka as a head coach, Fred VanVleet as their lead point guard, I think that they're going to do a lot of wonders, not just from X's and O's, but also holding those young guys accountable and making sure that they're about, winning habits. And on the flip side with Toronto, I do wonder if this is the precursor of basically they're stripping down their championship team. Now, to what you were saying, they did do that move to retain Jakob Poeltl, but now that Fred VanVleet's gone, maybe they're the team that's the pathway for a Damian Lillard trade or something else. Who knows? But, when you look at Pascal Siakam, OG Anunoby, they're all eligible for extensions, and they're great players. Pascal Siakam, a very versatile player, can do a lot of things. OG Anunoby, one of the best defenders, or not best defenders, but a really good all-NBA defensive player. But you wonder if they keep those guys this season, what are they going to accomplish? They'll be respectable, but are they a true player in the Eastern Conference? And maybe this is the time that they just decide, we're going to strip down. We already have a new head coach, but we'll have to wait and see. It would obviously have to be the right deal in play for that to happen.
Yeah, you heard a lot about backup plans in Toronto, whether it was Gabe Vincent. Maybe they can make a run at Malcolm Brogdon in Boston, but it's hard to see them as anything more than a play-in team, even if everything breaks right for them next season. With the Rockets, look, I have been hard on Houston the last couple of years. There's no doubt about that. I thought they were effectively a rudderless franchise. And when the Harden stuff came up at midseason last year, I was at times apoplectic about it because I didn't understand why the Rockets would entertain that. And let's be clear, and I wrote this for SI.com, but over multiple meetings, high-level meetings within that organization, they were discussing a James Harden return. There was unanimity in the upper levels of that front office at one point with Tillman Fertitta, his son Patrick Fertitta, Raphael Stone, the general manager. They were going to pursue James Harden. There was a lot of momentum towards that. Now, it sure sounds like Ime Udoka came there and became the adult in the room and said, look, this isn't going to work. I'm a defensive-minded guy. James Harden is not a defensive-minded player. It doesn't make any sense to bring in a guy that's going to be 34 years old before the start of next season to add to this mix. So, I give them a lot of credit for pivoting and going the direction of Fred VanVleet. It's a lot of money. There's no doubt about that. But VanVleet has been one of the most durable guys over the last couple of years. He is, like I said, a good defensive player. I think this is the right move for Houston. They still have some cap flexibility. They're going to have to spend it on somebody. So I like this move, by the Rockets. I don't think it puts them in the playoff mix, but having Fred VanVleet in that locker room is really going to help them in the years to come.
Yeah, Chris, I'm with you. Very too early to say they're a playoff team, but they're at least going to be a respectable, young, exciting team that maybe their upsides in a few years from now. And look, they really dodged a bullet with not getting James Harden, not just for the reasons that you outlined, but just think of the dynamics. I don't think if they wound up getting him that he would be perceived as the franchise guy among the young players because of how much his game is on the decline. And I think it would have ultimately created this weird vacuum where James Harden's in it for his numbers to show that he's worth what he was. And then the young guys kind of competing against him for their stake with the team. And clearly here, Fred VanVleet's considered more respected. He's playing the right way. And so, if I had to guess, probably a stretch to think playoffs maybe playing, but I think the larger point is the big picture of this is year one of the foundation of right habits, good coaching, good leadership. And then the following season, maybe that's when they start making some pathway of being seen as a real, not contender, but at least a team that can be in the playoff mix.
Well, they're heading in the right direction. There's no question about that. Jalen Green could score. We'll see what Amen Thompson can do. Alperen Sengun is a versatile big man. And now you add VanVleet and probably somebody else. There'll be somebody else they'll use their cap space on. That'll probably help them next season. So a good move and a good day, I think, for the Houston Rockets. Last thing for you. All eyes have been on Portland for the last week or so. The Blazers elected, I think smartly, to go the Scoot Henderson route in the draft, taking a potentially transformative point guard with the 3rd overall pick. But they didn't make the kind of upgrades that Damian Lillard was looking for. And over the first few hours of free agency, they didn't make any upgrades, really. They re-signed Jerami Grant. That was widely expected, but they re-signed him to a whopper of a deal. 5 years, $160 million. That's a big number. And I'm not sure how tradable that's going to be, over the next couple of years. Jerami Grant's 29 years old. Good player. Very good player. But, our team's going to be looking at him saying, we'll take him on for the next 4+ years at $30 million per. So that's a problem the Blazers could run into down the line. And I look around, Mark, and I don't see the deal that makes Portland, a contender. Maybe they looked at Toronto, and I've reported in the past they have been discussing deals involving OG Anunoby and Pascal Siakam. Maybe they look in that direction and try to add one of them, but you're probably going to give up Anthony Simons in a deal like that. You're going to give up draft capital in a deal like that. I mean, I don't know. Do you see a pathway for Portland to get to the place they need to be to satisfy Damian Lillard?
Well, it's an interesting question, and not just with their big picture aspirations and where they can get, but the trade itself. So I'll take the big picture here. There is a pathway to get to where they were prior to Damian Lillard's injury, but that doesn't satisfy what Damian Lillard's all about. They could be the Portland Trailblazers that makes the playoffs and is considered a dangerous playoff team that could get to the second round. But clearly it's about, okay, what can be done so they're finally a championship contender? When it comes to the Jerami Grant move, I do understand it through the pragmatic lens of, unless they're going to trade Damian Lillard and some of their young guys, which they shouldn't do, this was probably the most realistic and obtainable way of making the team better. And you also look at the political dynamics of, this is a player that Damian Lillard liked playing with. If you're recruited to play with, this can at least assuage in the short term, maybe of some of Damian Lillard's frustrations. But to your point, I think the number was too large. The year was too large, in the event that if it gets to the point that they're just, on the hamster wheel and they trade Damian Lillard, packaging him with Jerami Grant could become difficult. But if it was a shorter contract, I thought it could be a good move, both for the short term of assuaging Damian Lillard, as well as the long term if it gets to the point that they ultimately conclude after Damian Lillard says, I should be traded, that they could attach someone of value as part of that deal. But yeah, that 5 years is a lot for Jerami Grant. I'm a Syracuse guy, Chris Mannix. So there is some bias, but I will even say that Jerami Grant did not deserve that kind of deal.
I mean, look, players deserve whatever they can get. I'm of the opinion.
Yeah, that's fair.
The money's going somewhere, right? It's either going in a billionaire's pocket or it's going in a player's pocket. So why not have it go in the player's pocket? It's the number of years that worries me, because that's what makes it a difficult deal to trade. Yeah, the salary cap is going to go up, each and every year, so it gets less and less onerous each year. But the other thing is, who are they bidding against? That's kind of, it goes back to the conversation about Kyrie. Like, who are they bidding against in the open market? Who was giving Jerami Grant 4 years at $30 million per year? Maybe that team was out there, but you saw cap space start to dry up, pretty quick. You saw before free agency, Detroit took on Joe Harris's contract. You look down in Orlando, they were quick to put Joe Ingles into that cap space. We knew the Rockets were going to go all in on Fred VanVleet, and that was going to gobble up a lion's share of the cap space. It just felt like the Blazers with Grant were bidding against themselves there. And, Jerami Grant, to his credit, took advantage of it. I just don't see how this ends. And I've been saying this for weeks now, months even. Like, I don't see how this ends in any way but with Damian Lillard and Portland agreeing that both sides should move on. And for Portland, it's the right move. You've got a good young team anyway. You're kind of rebuilding as it is. You've got Shaedon Sharpe. You've got Scoot Henderson. You've got some young pieces in that mix. You're going to get a haul for Damian Lillard, whether it's from Miami or Brooklyn, whoever jumps into that mix. I just think it's, unless something changes over the weekend. We saw a lot of dominoes fall in the first day. We saw $1 billion spent in that first day. I don't see how, the next couple of days are going to yield the kind of return that makes Damian Lillard happy. It's just kind of where I fall.
Yeah, well, without a doubt. And, I'll add a few things here. I mean, first of all, to what you said about Jerami Grant contract, yeah, he deserves what he gets because it was offered. Portland did an overpay there, so the mistake's on them. But as far as what you said about where this ends up, I think it's inevitable that Damian Lillard eventually will feel frustrated and say, you know what? enough's enough.
He shouldn't have to. He shouldn't have to, though, Mark. Like, he should have to. Like, they should go to him and be like, "We're sorry, man. We couldn't get it done. So let's talk about a deal." Like, if it gets to the point where Lillard has to go public with a trade request, that's on the Blazers. That's their fault. They shouldn't put the greatest player in franchise history in that position.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I think that the ironic part is I think that the Blazers' reluctance out of this is twofold. One, I think that they fear that it's a much more difficult process to just tear the studs down and rebuild back up. And number two, I think that they just don't want to be seen as the bad guy to Damian Lillard, but that just creates more problems. So to what you were saying about Damian, I think it's inevitable. I think the real question though here, Chris, moving forward is when does that take place? Is it after there is full clarity on what the roster is going to look like next season, or will it be once it plays out in real time at the beginning of next season? It's clearly not enough to work, or lean into the trade deadline where there is some success, but it's the same old story. Yeah, they're a nice competitive team that can make some noise in the first round, nothing else. So I don't know what stage it's going to be. Off season after roster's done, beginning of the season if there are early season struggles, or lead into the next season's trade deadline. But the ultimate conclusion is this is going to end in less than a season.
Yeah, and you got to remember, as valuable as Lillard is now, he is one injury away from being untradeable. The guy's got $200 million left on that contract. And right now, teams are willing to take it on, but he's had some injury issues over the years, some abdominal issues over the years. He's one bad abdominal strain away from being an extremely difficult guy to trade, and certainly not going to get the return that, he would get if the Blazers traded him this offseason. All right, follow Mark Medina on social media. Check him out, Fox Sports Radio, Sports Not, the Sporting Tribune. Mark, always good to catch up, man. Appreciate your time.
Chris, likewise. Keep doing your thing.